Still can't hit the broadside of a barn, Pops? The voice cut through the sterile air of Elite Firearms Academy, followed by a chorus of snickering from the group of young shooters occupying the premium lanes. Marcus Chen, 79 years old, said nothing. He simply lowered his weathered M1 Garand, its wooden stock darkened with age and countless hours of handling. The indoor range was a monument to modern firepower, gleaming tactical rifles bristling with scopes and accessories, digital targeting systems, climate-controlled precision, and in the middle of it all stood Marcus, looking like he'd wandered in from a different century entirely. His rifle was a relic from World War II, its walnut stock worn smooth by decades of faithful service. He wore simple khakis and a cardigan sweater, a stark contrast to the tactical gear and designer shooting apparel surrounding him. The mockery came from Lane 7, where four men in their 20s treated the range like their personal playground. Their leader, a cocky investment banker named Brett, had been watching Marcus's shooting session with growing amusement. 15 shots, 0 hits. Brett announced loudly, "Maybe it's time to take up checkers instead." Range Safety Officer Jake Morrison walked over, his expression a mixture of professional concern and barely concealed irritation. At 26, Morrison took his authority seriously, especially when it came to maintaining the range's elite reputation. "Sir," Morrison said, approaching Marcus's lane with forced patience, "I need to discuss your shooting performance. You've fired an entire magazine without a single hit on the target." Marcus looked up with calm, steady eyes that seemed to hold depths Morrison couldn't fathom. "I'm hitting what I'm aiming at," he replied quietly, his voice carrying a slight accent that suggested immigrant roots. Morrison glanced at the pristine paper target 100 yards downrange. Not a single hole marred its surface. He sighed with the exasperation of someone dealing with a confused elderly customer. "Sir, with all due respect, the target is completely clean. Perhaps you should consider starting at a closer distance. We have 25-yard lanes that might be more appropriate." The condescension was unmistakable. Morrison was speaking to Marcus as if he were a child who needed gentle redirection rather than a paying customer. "I'll stay here," Marcus said simply, beginning to reload his rifle with practiced economical movement. Brett and his friends were openly laughing now, their expensive equipment forgotten, as they enjoyed the free entertainment. "Hey Morrison," Brett called out, "how about some senior citizen shooting lessons? Maybe a nice big cartoon target." Morrison's jaw tightened. He disliked Brett's arrogance, but the man was a platinum member who spent thousands at the facility. The old man, however, was becoming a liability. "Sir," Morrison said, his voice hardening, "I'm the range safety officer. If you can't demonstrate basic marksmanship proficiency, I'll have to ask you to leave. You're potentially endangering other shooters." Marcus continued loading his rifle, his movements never hurrying, never showing frustration. "My shooting is perfectly safe," he said calmly. But Morrison had already made his decision. "I'm going to have to see your membership credentials and inspect that weapon," Morrison declared, stepping closer to Marcus's shooting position. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. Around them, other shooters had begun to notice the confrontation. Some watched with sympathy for the elderly man being hassled. Others nodded approval at the enforcement of safety standards. The range's atmosphere had shifted from focused practice to uncomfortable spectacle. Marcus calmly reached into his jacket and produced a basic membership card along with his driver's license. Both were well-worn but legitimate. Morrison examined them with exaggerated thoroughness, clearly hoping to find some violation. "Marcus Chen," Morrison read aloud, "age 70. Sir, given your age and demonstrated inability to hit targets, I have serious concerns about your continued range privileges." Brett's group was enjoying the show immensely. "Maybe they have a nice shuffleboard court next door," one of them called out, earning fresh laughter. "I'd like to examine your rifle," Morrison continued, extending his hand toward the M1 Garand. "Safety protocols require inspection of any weapon that's being fired erratically." Marcus hesitated for just a moment, then handed over the rifle with obvious reluctance. Morrison took it, surprised by its weight and solid construction. Unlike the modern firearms he was used to, this felt substantial, real, a piece of history. As Morrison turned the rifle over in his hands, his fingers brushed against something unusual embedded in the wooden stock near the butt plate. It was a small tarnished brass medallion, no bigger than a quarter, skillfully inlaid into the wood. The moment his skin touched the metal, the sterile quiet of the range seemed to fade. For just an instant, Morrison glimpsed something impossible. A much younger Marcus, his face painted with camouflage, rain streaming down his helmet, as he peered through iron sights at an impossible distance. The crack of rifle fire echoed not from the controlled environment of the shooting range, but from dense jungle undergrowth. Morrison blinked, shaking his head to clear the strange sensation. It was just an old gun with some kind of sentimental decoration. He gave it a cursory inspection, and placed it back on the bench, pushing it slightly away from Marcus. "Everything appears to be in working order," Morrison said, trying to regain his authoritative demeanor. "But your shooting performance remains unacceptable. I can't allow you to continue wasting ammunition and potentially creating safety hazards." A small crowd had gathered behind the shooting stalls, drawn by the confrontation. Among them stood Captain David Park, a recently retired Marine who had been practicing in a nearby lane. Something about the situation troubled him, not the range officer's authority, but the way the old man carried himself. Park recognized the bearing. He'd seen it in the eyes of the old-timers, the veterans of forgotten conflicts who sometimes visited Marine bases. It was the stillness of someone who had faced real danger and survived it. When Marcus fired, Park had noticed something the others missed. The wire mechanism holding the target downrange trembled with each shot, not the paper, but the metal frame supporting it. Captain Park quietly stepped away from the crowd and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts to a number he hadn't used in months. The administrative office of his former unit at Camp Pendleton. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," came the familiar voice after 2 rings. "Rodriguez, it's Captain Park. I need a favor. Can you run a name through the system for me?" "Park? Jesus. Sir, I thought you'd disappeared into civilian life. What do you need?" "I'm at a shooting range watching something that doesn't add up. There's an elderly man here, Marcus Chen, age 79. He's shooting what looks like a WBO-era M1 Garand, with some kind of brass medallion in the stock." There was a pause. "That's oddly specific, sir. What's your concern?" Park watched as Morrison continued to berate Marcus, while Brett's group provided commentary. "The range officer is about to throw him out for missing targets. But something feels wrong. This guy moves like he's been around weapons his entire life." "Hold on. Let me check our veteran database." Park could hear typing in the background. Then Rodriguez's voice changed completely. "Sir, are you sure about the name? Marcus Chen, age 79. That's what's on his driver's license." "Because I'm looking at a classified file that requires authorization above my pay grade to access. All I can see is that Marcus Chen served in multiple classified operations between 1962 and..." "It doesn't specify, sir. Just says Special Activities Division, with clearance codes I don't recognize." "Captain, if this is the same Marcus Chen, you're looking at someone whose service record is so classified that most of it doesn't officially exist." Meanwhile, Morrison had reached his final decision. "Sir, I'm terminating your membership effective immediately. I'm calling security to escort you from the premises." Marcus accepted this news with the same calm he'd shown throughout the confrontation. But when Morrison reached for his rifle again, something shifted in the old man's demeanor. "I'd prefer to pack my own weapon," Marcus said quietly, but with unmistakable authority. Morrison was already holding the M1 Garand, examining the brass medallion more closely. In the fluorescent lighting, he could just make out faint engravings, coordinates and what appeared to be a date from night. Park ended his call and approached the group. "Excuse me," he said, addressing Morrison. "Before you take any action, you might want to verify this gentleman's background more thoroughly." "This doesn't concern you," Morrison replied dismissively. "I'm handling a safety violation. I'm not questioning your authority," Park said carefully. "But I'd strongly suggest you make a phone call before this goes any further." In the distance, the range's main phone was ringing. Morrison ignored it, focused on asserting his control over the situation. The phone kept ringing. The range's main phone continued its insistent ringing, until finally, one of the desk clerks answered. After a brief conversation, she hurried over to Morrison with obvious urgency. "Jake, you need to take this call. It's someone from Camp Pendleton asking about Marcus Chen." Morrison's expression shifted from annoyed confidence to confused concern. "What would the Marines want with him?" "I don't know, but they sound very serious." Reluctantly, Morrison walked to the front desk, still holding Marcus's rifle. He picked up the phone with visible irritation. "This is Jake Morrison, Range Safety Officer." "Morrison, this is Colonel Hayes, Camp Pendleton. I understand you have a Marcus Chen at your facility." Morrison straightened instinctively at the commanding tone. "Yes, sir. I'm dealing with a safety situation involving an elderly shooter who stopped talking and listened carefully. Colonel Hayes interrupted. Marcus Chen is a decorated veteran whose service record is classified at the highest levels. You will treat him with appropriate respect and provide him with whatever assistance he requires. Sir, I don't understand. The man can't hit a target at 100 yards. Son, Marcus Chen was hitting targets at distances you can't imagine while you were still in diapers. If he appears to be missing, there's a reason for it that's beyond your comprehension. Morrison felt the ground shifting beneath him. What exactly are you telling me, sir? I'm telling you that you're dealing with one of the most accomplished marksmen in military history. His service with Special Activities Division included operations that officially never happened, in places that don't appear on any map. Back at the shooting range, Marcus stood patiently while the crowd watched the unfolding drama. Brett and his friends had fallen silent, beginning to sense that something significant was happening. Morrison returned to the group, his face pale and uncertain. He looked at Marcus with new eyes, seeing not a confused elderly man but someone whose true capabilities were hidden beneath layers of classification. Mr. Chen, Morrison began hesitantly. I may have misunderstood the situation. Marcus's expression remained calm, but Park caught a glimmer of something in his eyes, not triumph but weariness at having his peaceful anonymity disturbed. Colonel Hayes would like to speak with you. Morrison continued, extending the phone toward Marcus. Marcus took the phone with steady hands. Hello, Tom, he said quietly. Ghost, came the voice on the other end, using what was clearly a call sign from decades past. I thought you'd retired from showing off. I was trying to practice quietly. It seems I've caused some confusion. The confusion isn't yours to bear, old friend. Would you mind giving these young people a small demonstration of what real marksmanship looks like? Marcus glanced around at the assembled crowd. Morrison's embarrassed face, Brett's group's nervous expressions, Park's respectful attention, and the dozen other shooters who had gathered to watch. That's not why I'm here, Tom. But sometimes the young need to understand what they're seeing. Marcus sighed quietly. Very well, but just once. Marcus handed the phone back to Morrison and retrieved his M1 Garand with the reverent care of someone handling a sacred object. The entire range had fallen silent, word having spread that something extraordinary was about to occur. If I could have everyone's attention, Marcus said, his voice carrying easily through the space despite its quiet tone. What you're about to see is not a display of ego, but a demonstration of precision that served a purpose in a different time. He moved to his shooting position with fluid grace that belied his age. As he settled into his stance, his entire demeanor transformed. The shuffling elderly man vanished, replaced by someone whose body knew exactly what it was designed to do. The target appears untouched, because I haven't been aiming at the paper, Marcus explained as he loaded a single round. I've been aiming at something much more challenging. Morrison found his voice. What exactly have you been shooting at? The mounting clips that hold the target frame, Marcus replied. Specifically, the tiny bolts that secure the left side of the mechanism. Each shot has been precision targeted to gradually loosen them without damaging the overall structure. Park stepped forward. That's impossible. Those bolts are barely visible at this distance. Marcus settled behind his rifle, his breathing becoming controlled and methodical. In 1968, in the mountains near the Cambodian border, I was required to disable an enemy communications array, without alerting guards to the sabotage. The solution was to systematically weaken specific connection points until the entire system failed during normal operation. He paused, his eye finding the scope. The technique served its purpose then. Today it's simply practice. Marcus fired once. The sound echoed through the range. But unlike before, this shot was followed by a metallic clattering as the target frame's left side sagged noticeably. Jesus Christ, Brett whispered, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. One more shot should complete the demonstration, Marcus said, reloading with practiced efficiency. His second shot rang out, and the entire target frame collapsed, revealing what lay behind it. In the backstop wall, 15 holes were clustered in a space no larger than a silver dollar. Not scattered misses but a perfect pattern showing where each previous miss had actually struck. But it was the arrangement that left the crowd speechless. The bullet holes formed a precise star pattern, with the final 2 shots completing the geometric design. Morrison stared at the display, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. How did you? The calculations, trigonometry, ballistics, and about 50 years of practice, Marcus replied simply, beginning to pack away his rifle. The mathematics of precision never change, only the applications. Colonel Hayes's voice came over the phone speaker, which Morrison had forgotten he was still holding. Ladies and gentlemen, You've just witnessed marksmanship at a level achieved by fewer than a dozen people in military history. Mr. Chen was never missing his targets. He was demonstrating skills that were developed for missions your security clearances will never be high enough to learn about. The shooting range had transformed into something resembling a military briefing room. Word of the demonstration had spread throughout the facility, drawing staff and shooters from every corner of the building. Morrison stood at the center of it all, his authority completely undermined by the revelation of what had actually occurred. Brett and his friends looked like they wanted to disappear entirely. The men who had been mocking Marcus for missing targets now understood they had been watching a master craftsman at work, their ridicule exposing only their own ignorance. "Mr. Chen," Morrison began, his voice uncertain, "I owe you an apology." "I had no idea. You had no way of knowing," Marcus interrupted gently. "My service record is classified for good reasons. The operations I was involved in were never meant to be discussed publicly." Captain Park approached respectfully. "Sir, if I may ask, what unit did you serve with?" Marcus's eyes grew distant. "Officially I was never in Vietnam. The unit I served with conducted operations that couldn't be acknowledged by any government. We were specialists in what you might call precision problem solving." Colonel Hayes's voice continued over the speakerphone. Marcus Chen was part of a program so classified that most military historians don't know it existed. His marksmanship abilities were developed for missions requiring surgical precision in impossible circumstances. Morrison struggled to regain some semblance of professional composure. "Sir, what should I tell the other members about what happened here today?" "Tell them they witnessed something that very few people ever see," Marcus replied, closing his rifle case with practiced efficiency. "And perhaps remind them that judgments based on appearance alone are rarely accurate." The crowd began to disperse, but many lingered, clearly hoping to hear more about the mysterious operations Marcus had alluded to. He disappointed them by maintaining the same quiet dignity that had characterized his entire visit. Brett finally found the courage to approach. His face was flushed with embarrassment, his earlier cockiness completely absent. "Mr. Chen, I want to apologize for my behavior. I was completely out of line." Marcus studied the younger man with eyes that had seen far worse than casual disrespect. "We all make assumptions, son. The important thing is learning from them. Could you teach me to shoot like?" Marcus shouldered his rifle case, preparing to leave. The shooting was the easy part. The difficult part was everything else. The discipline, the dedication, the willingness to serve something larger than yourself. He paused at the range exit. "If you're serious about improving your marksmanship, focus less on your equipment and more on understanding your purpose. A rifle is only a tool. The person behind it determines its value." As Marcus walked toward the parking lot, Morrison called after him, "Mr. Chen, your membership, there won't be any restrictions. You're welcome here anytime, with any assistance you need." Marcus nodded acknowledgement, but kept walking. He had come to the range seeking quiet practice time, not recognition or The demonstration had been necessary, but it had also exposed him in ways that made him uncomfortable. 3 hours later, Elite Firearms Academy was still buzzing with conversations about what everyone was calling the Chen demonstration. Morrison sat in his supervisor's office, facing questions about how the situation had escalated so dramatically. "So, let me understand this," said Range Director Patricia Walsh, reviewing Morrison's incident report. "You were about to eject a Medal of Honor recipient for missing targets, when in fact he was demonstrating precision marksmanship at a level you didn't recognize." Morrison shifted uncomfortably. The targets appeared clean. There was no indication that he was hitting anything intentionally, except for the small detail that he was systematically dismantling the target mechanism with surgical precision. Walsh replied dryly, "Jake, this isn't just about misjudging one customer. This is about failing to recognize excellence because it didn't fit your expectations." Outside the office, the range had returned to normal operations, but the atmosphere remained changed. Brett and his friends had quietly packed up their equipment and left, their earlier arrogance replaced by humbled silence. Captain Park lingered near the front desk, speaking with other veterans who had witnessed the demonstration. "I've seen a lot of shooters in my 20 years of service," he was saying, "but nothing like what that man just did. The math alone, calculating trajectory, wind resistance, and structural mechanics simultaneously. That's not just marksmanship. That's applied engineering." Meanwhile, Marcus Chen sat in his modest sedan in the parking lot, making a phone call to Colonel Hayes. "Tom, I appreciate your intervention, but I'd prefer this didn't become a spectacle." Ghost, you've been hiding your light under a bushel for 40 years. Sometimes the world needs reminding that heroes come in unexpected packages. I'm not a hero, Tom. I was a soldier who did his job. You were a soldier who did jobs that other soldiers couldn't do. There's a difference. Marcus watched through the windshield as range employees and customers continued to stream in and out of the building, many stealing glances at his unremarkable car. The attention makes me uncomfortable. I understand. But Jake Morrison and those young men learned something important today. Sometimes we all need our assumptions challenged. Back inside, Walsh was concluding her meeting with Morrison. You're not being fired, Jake, but you are going on mandatory training, veteran sensitivity, respect protocols, and maybe some basic ballistics, so you can recognize advanced marksmanship when you see it. Morrison nodded acceptance. Ma'am, how was I supposed to know he was what he was? You weren't supposed to know his service record, but you were supposed to treat him with basic respect regardless. That's where you failed. The range director pulled up Marcus's membership file on her computer. Look at this. Member for 12 years. Never a single complaint. Always follows safety protocols perfectly. His only unusual characteristic was that he never used the electronic targeting systems. I assumed he didn't know how to use them. He didn't need them, Jake. When you can calculate bullet drop and windage in your head, digital displays become redundant. 1 week later, Morrison found himself in the most unusual training session of his career. The instructor was Marcus Chen himself, who had agreed to conduct a private seminar on advanced marksmanship principles for the range staff. The first thing you must understand, Marcus explained to the assembled group of range officers and instructors, is that true marksmanship isn't about the weapon. It's about the harmony between mind, body, and purpose. Morrison listened intently, his earlier embarrassment transformed into genuine curiosity about skills he had never imagined possible. When you saw me missing the targets, Marcus continued, you made an assumption based on conventional expectation. But not all shooting serves the same purpose. Sometimes precision means hitting exactly what you intend, even when others can't see the target. He gestured toward the range's high-tech equipment. These tools are excellent for standard marksmanship training, but they can also create dependence. When you rely entirely on external systems, you lose the ability to adapt when those systems fail. Brett Martinez had asked to attend the session, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine humility. Mr. Chen, how do you calculate those kinds of shots without digital assist? Marcus smiled patiently. Mathematics, physics, and experience. The principles never change. Trajectory, wind effect, target movement. The only variables are range, conditions, and purpose. Over the following hour, Marcus demonstrated techniques that most of the staff had never encountered. He showed them how to calculate bullet drop using visual reference points, how to read wind conditions from environmental indicators, and most importantly, how to maintain focus under pressure. In Vietnam, Marcus said during a quiet moment, we often worked in conditions where electronic equipment failed. Rain, humidity, enemy interference. The missions depended on fundamental skills that no technology could replace. Morrison raised his hand tentatively. Sir, about that brass medallion in your rifle stock. Marcus's expression grew distant. Coordinates from a village we helped evacuate in night. The medallion reminds me that every shot has consequences beyond the target range. The training session concluded with Marcus demonstrating one final technique, shooting at a playing card placed at 200 yards. But aiming specifically to split the card vertically without damaging the horizontal edges. His shot was perfect. As the staff dispersed, Morrison approached Marcus privately. Sir, I want to thank you for doing this training. I learned more in 3 hours than I had in 3 years of range work. Marcus was packing his equipment with the same methodical care he brought to everything. Jake, you're a good range officer. You just needed to expand your definition of what good shooting looks like. Will you continue practicing here? If you don't mind an old man occasionally doing things differently than your other customers. Morrison extended his hand. Miss Chen, you'll always be welcome here, and if anyone questions your methods, they'll have to answer to me. As they shook hands, Morrison noticed the strength in Marcus's grip, not the frail grasp of an elderly man, but the steady pressure of someone whose hands had performed tasks requiring absolute precision for decades. 2 months after the incident at Elite Firearms Academy, Marcus received an unexpected phone call that would change his quiet retirement in ways he hadn't anticipated. Mr. Chen, this is Sarah Rodriguez, from Channel 6. We've received information about a remarkable demonstration you gave at a local shooting range, and we'd like to feature your story in our Veterans Recognition Series." Marcus sighed quietly. He had been hoping the incident would fade from memory, allowing him to return to his preferred anonymity. "Miss Rodriguez, I appreciate the interest, but I'm not comfortable with publicity. My service was meant to remain confidential." "Sir, we understand your desire for privacy, but Colonel Hayes at Camp Pendleton contacted us personally. He believes your story could help people better understand the sacrifices veterans have made, even when those sacrifices can't be fully disclosed." After much consideration, Marcus agreed to a limited interview with the understanding that certain aspects of his service would remain classified. The resulting television segment would become one of the most watched veteran features in the station's history. The interview took place at the same shooting range where the demonstration had occurred. Morrison, now a changed man in his approach to veteran customers, provided background about the incident that had opened everyone's eyes. "I thought I was dealing with a confused elderly man who couldn't hit targets," Morrison admitted on camera. "Instead, I was watching one of the most skilled marksmen in military history demonstrate techniques I didn't even recognize." Marcus's portion of the interview was characteristically modest. "I served my country in ways that required certain skill. The shooting was just one tool among many that we used to complete difficult missions." When pressed about the specific nature of those missions, Marcus remained diplomatically vague. There were places where conventional military operations couldn't succeed, situations that required specialized approaches. The details remained classified. The broadcast had an immediate impact on the shooting community. Elite Firearms Academy began receiving calls from military historians, veteran organizations, and marksmanship enthusiasts wanting to learn more about the techniques Marcus had demonstrated. More importantly, the story sparked conversations about assumptions people make about elderly veterans and the hidden histories many carry. Brett Martinez, who had been featured in the broadcast discussing his own change in perspective, started a weekly program at the range specifically for veteran shooters. "After meeting Mr. Chen, I realized how much I had to learn from people whose experiences I'd been dismissing." The program grew rapidly, attracting veterans from multiple conflicts who found camaraderie in sharing their skills while maintaining appropriate discretion about classified aspects of their service. Marcus occasionally participated in these sessions, always emphasizing the principles behind the techniques rather than the specific missions where they had been applied. The important lesson he would tell new participants isn't about the shooting itself. It's about dedication to excellence, respect for others, and understanding that true service often goes unrecognized. 6 months later, Elite Firearms Academy established the Marcus Chen Memorial Training Program. Despite Marcus being very much alive and periodically embarrassed by the attention, the program focused on advanced marksmanship techniques and veteran mentorship, ensuring that the knowledge demonstrated in that one remarkable afternoon would be passed on to future generations. 1 year after his demonstration at Elite Firearms Academy, Marcus Chen stood before a group of young Marines at Camp Pendleton, conducting his first official military training session since his retirement from classified service. Colonel Hayes had finally convinced him to share his knowledge with a new generation of precision marksmen. "The techniques I'm going to show you today," Marcus began addressing the assembled scouts and snipers, "were developed for missions that officially never happened, but the principles behind them apply to any situation requiring absolute precision under pressure." Among the young Marines sat Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, no relation to the range director, who had specifically requested assignment to this training after hearing about Marcus's capabilities through military channels. "Sir," she asked during the initial briefing, "is it true that you once made a 1,200-meter shot through a window to disable communications equipment without injuring the operator?" Marcus paused, considering how much he could reveal. "I once participated in an operation that required precision targeting of specific equipment at extended range. The goal was mission completion with minimal collateral impact." The young Marines absorbed this carefully worded response, understanding that they were receiving glimpses of classified operations that had shaped military tactics for decades. Over the following week, Marcus shared techniques that bridged the gap between conventional marksmanship and the specialized skills required for unconventional warfare. He demonstrated wind-reading methods that didn't require instruments, trajectory calculations that could be performed under combat stress, and most importantly, the mental discipline required to maintain accuracy when lives depended on every shot. "Technology will fail you," Marcus emphasized during one session. "Equipment will break, batteries will die, digital systems will malfunction. But if you understand the fundamental principles, you can adapt to any situation." Jake Morrison, who had traveled to Camp Pendleton specifically to attend these sessions, found himself learning alongside active duty Marines. The experience had transformed his understanding of what it meant to be a range safety officer, Miss Chen Morrison said during a break in training. I've been thinking about that day at the range. You could have embarrassed me much worse than you did. Why didn't you? Marcus cleaned his rifle with practiced motions, considering his response. Jake, you were doing your job as you understood. The mistake wasn't in your intentions, but in your assumptions. Everyone deserves the chance to learn from their mistakes rather than be destroyed by them. As the training week concluded, Colonel Hayes presented Marcus with an official certificate of appreciation from the Marine Corps for distinguished service in maintaining skills essential to national security and passing critical knowledge to future generations. Marcus accepted the recognition with his characteristic humility, but privately, he felt a sense of completion that had been missing since his retirement from active operations. That evening, he called Morrison at Elite Firearms Academy. Jake, I have a proposition for you. How would you feel about establishing a formal training partnership between the range and Camp Pendleton? I think we could create something valuable for both civilian and military shooters. Morrison's enthusiastic acceptance launched a program that would eventually train thousands of marksmen, ensuring that the legacy of precision, respect and service would continue long after Marcus Chen finally hung up his rifle for the last time.